All right, it's Monday morning. Welcome to another weekend recap, the final Monday before the start of training camp. And it's a cliched thing to say, it's an old person thing to say, but I can't believe that it's already here. I can't believe that I'm going to say this again next week when it actually is here, but I can't believe that it's 1 week until the start of training camp. I can't believe the summer has gone by this fast. It seems like just yesterday it was the 4th of July. It seems like just yesterday it was the June prospect camps, and we were doing these Monday morning weekend recaps talking about all the commitments and official visits. I mean, we just started this thing, the beginning of June? It's a brand new thing that we were doing here on Panther-Lair.com, and here we are already a couple months into it and staring down the door of training camp with it just a week away. I was gone this past week, gone on vacation, spent a week in the Great Smoky Mountains. We can talk about vacation plans and things like that. I can give you my travel log at another time, tell you what I thought about Gatlinburg, Tennessee, but it was basically like a boardwalk without the beach. That's neither here nor there. Typically, lots of news breaks when I go on vacation. I thought I planned this one a little bit better. Oftentimes I go on vacation in the month of June, and there are a lot of commitments. This year, didn't take the June vacation. Instead, went on vacation in late July. There was still news that happened. There were still things that went down, but not nearly as much as there often is. Fortunately, we still have plenty to talk about on this here weekend recap. We do this every Monday morning. Break down everything you need to know from the weekend, everything you need to know from the last week, everything you need to know to start the new week. And it's all right here on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You've got the little subscribe button right there. I highly recommend that you click that. And you'll never miss any of our video content right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We have these Monday morning weekend recap videos that we put out every week. We've got the Wednesday night live show every Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. for about an hour or so. We just sit down and talk Pitt sports. It's a live stream. I talk, you ask questions and post comments, and we interact and go back and forth. It's a lot of fun. And then we've had a series of video interviews throughout the summer that we've released on Friday. Last week we had Jamarius Burton, Pitt senior guard, one of Pitt's many senior guards, but maybe the most important senior guard, at least I think in terms of leadership for Pitt basketball in this coming season. And I thought it was a great conversation with Jamarius about last season, about this coming season, about his optimism, about the guards. We covered a lot of bases. It was a lot of fun to talk to him. So hopefully you get a chance to check that out. But if you are concerned that you're going to miss some of our video content, click the subscribe button, turn on those notifications, and you will never miss any of the things we put out on our YouTube channel. Remember, it's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And when training camp starts next week, we're certainly going to have more where that came from. It's going to be pretty consistent flow, I think, of video content. You don't want to miss any of it. So subscribe to the Panther-Lair.com YouTube channel. Of course, the website, Panther-Lair.com. It's right there on your screen. This is the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com. Like I said, I was on vacation last week, and we still had a ton of content on the site. Jim Hammett did a great job of holding it down. And now I'm back, and we're ready to head into the final week before training camp, so you know what all the topics are going to be about. Except there are other things to talk about this week, because while I was gone, it wasn't the most newsworthy week I've ever seen during a vacation, but there was still plenty that happened. And I want to start off with Pat Narduzzi and his comments last week on the Richard Bazzi podcast, and then his comments at ACC Media Day. And I'm not sure, I think the Richard Bazzi podcast is where he drew most of his attention, but certainly his comments at ACC Media Day sort of followed that up. There were questions asked kind of following up on his comments on the Richard Bazzi podcast. You've seen this all by now. The two main topics were, one, he said that Pitt could win the Big Ten after how they played against Michigan State in the Peach Bowl loss. And we'll get into that in a second. And then he had some not so kind words about Mark Whipple and Mark Whipple's design and direction of the offense. And we can talk about that. But here's my first thing. Here's the first thing I have to say. All right, with all this stuff, and because I followed it from afar, I still looked at Twitter and looked at the message boards and stuff while I was on vacation. And then I got more into it over the course of the weekend here after I got back to town. And I have to say, on all of it, on all of the things that Pat Narduzzi said that got everyone all fired up and got, generated some amount of local attention for Pitt, and it seemed to be negative. And even on a national scale, my reaction to all of it is it's not anything new. Pat Narduzzi's been Pitt's head coach for 7 years now. We should have, and I think we don't have any misconceptions about who he is, his approach to coaching, his approach to public speaking, his approach just philosophically on a lot of levels. I mean, think about it this way. Pat Narduzzi's defense is roughly the same defense it was 7 years ago. I actually, earlier today, I was poking around at some different stuff. I found video of Michigan State defensive coordinator Pat Narduzzi breaking down the defensive scheme from it was 9 years ago. All right. And it's the same stuff. Yeah, there are tweaks, there are changes. I mean, people always evolve and change. It's the same stuff. Pat Narduzzi's defense in 2022 is the same as it was in 2015. And Pat Narduzzi himself is the same in 2022 as he was in 2015. He's always been, for lack of a better word, brash. And I don't say that necessarily in a derogatory manner or a negative manner, but it is his approach. He shoots from the hip, and he'll say what's on his mind, for better and for worse. He'll spit it out. And Mark Whipple is not the first coach that Pat Narduzzi has spoken of in a disparaging manner after they left the Pitt coaching staff or were fired from the Pitt coaching staff. He probably won't be the last. That's not anything new. And Narduzzi's comments about how Pitt could win the Big Ten, I'm not surprised to hear him say that. And I don't think, he rather famously claimed that Pitt was going to beat Clemson in the middle at the halftime of that 2016 game. He ended up being right about that. But it's not anything new for him to sort of speak in that fashion. And on the Michigan State thing, it's funny because I saw that Michigan State fans really got angry about that. And I have to think that most, and then there were even people sort of beyond that sort of Big Ten, what's an appropriate way to say it? Stands? Is that what people say these days? Do they still say that? Or is that what they said 3 years ago? Big Ten fans, I guess we would say, really seem to take umbrage with that. But I think any reasonable person who watched that game and had any kind of working knowledge of football would have probably agreed with Narduzzi's sentiment that Pitt wins that game rather comfortably with Kenny Pickett and pretty certainly with Nick Patty as well. I mean, you look at how that game went down. The first drive, Pitt doesn't score a touchdown because the kickoff, the game-opening kickoff, sticks in the ground at the 2-yard line. In the one of the weirdest things I've seen outside of that Steelers-Dolphins rain game in 2004 when the ball just stuck right in the ground. I mean, that's what happened on the turf at the Peach Bowl. The ball hit the ground and died instead of rolling into the end zone as it should have been. Who knows what happens if the ball comes out on a touchback in that case. But when Nick Patty had an actual drive to work with, on the second drive, he drove them down for a touchdown. I'm not going to say he's going to score a touchdown on every drive, but I think he's got a chance to score a few more. What do they end up with? 2 offensive touchdowns in that game, and one of them was Patty. I think he's got a pretty good chance to score a few more touchdowns and win that game. And people compare it to Kenneth Walker sitting out. I mean, it's not the same thing. You can't compare Walker and Pickett and the impact they have on their teams. I digress. This is all a long way to say that. I mean, Narduzzi's right that Pitt would have won that game with Kenny Pickett and probably with Nick Patty. I mean, they needed a pick 6 to make it a 10-point win against the third-string quarterback. It's not exactly like Michigan State blew them out of the water. But I digress. Would Pitt win the Big Ten? Could Pitt win the Big Ten? I don't know. It's a whole lot of hypotheticals, but I absolutely think Pat Narduzzi should have that confidence in his team. Now, there is something to be said for the question of not whether or not you're right, but whether or not you should say it. There's a Big Lebowski quote that comes to mind of "You're not wrong," and I won't repeat that quote here because this is a family program. I think the one question that comes to mind is, what do you gain? What do you gain from speaking negatively of the offensive coordinator who helped lead your team to an 11-3 record in an ACC championship? What do you gain from being so brash about the Big Ten? You're not necessarily wrong. I don't necessarily disagree with the substance of what was said. But I'm not sure what's accomplished other than drawing attention. Now, there is school thought that, all PR is good PR. If nothing else, the national media sat up and said, well, I don't know what's up with Narduzzi, but he's pretty wild. Take a little bit of notice. Take a little notice of Pitt. Take a little notice of the ACC. I don't think that was Pat Narduzzi's intention, simply because, bringing it back around to my original point, I've been listening to Pat Narduzzi and participating in Pat Narduzzi press conferences for the last 7 years. I'm familiar with how the man speaks. I'm familiar with the man's mannerisms. Perhaps others were not. Well, they are now because they got a pretty good taste of it. Certainly, last week. All right, number 2, the big news, there were a few pieces of what I would call news, large news, big news, depending on how you look at it. But recruiting news this week, B.J. Williams, an offensive lineman from Georgia, announced his commitment to Pitt. And this is another one where we have to make that designation of announced as opposed to saying he committed, because he actually committed weeks ago. The super secret commitment where Pat Narduzzi tweeted it out and didn't, no one knew, nobody knew who it was. There were no guesses, anything like that. Well, it was B.J. Williams, who was committed to Memphis when he took his official visit to Pitt at the end of June, and he gave his commitment that night, whatever night that was that Narduzzi tweeted that out. The Pitt is it tweet, and then announced it this past week. I forgot what day he even announced it. I was in another state. Thursday, Wednesday, Friday, I don't know, somewhere around there. So B.J. Williams is on the commitment list now. I think it might have been late in the week. It might have been Friday. He's on the commitment list now, and we had talked for a while about how Pitt could and likely would take a large offensive line class in this class of 2023. And now they're up to 5. They're up to 5 offensive linemen with B.J. Williams on board. By my count, it's about 3 tackles and 2 guards, although guys can always move around. Tackles can always move inside. If you're a really good guard, you could potentially, if you can move your feet really well, maybe you can move outside. But they had a few positions in this class where I think they needed to use the larger size of the class, where they're projected to have maybe as many as 22, 23 open scholarships for the recruiting class, and not even counting the transfers and whatnot, but just for the recruiting class, the opportunity to take 21, 22, 23 kids. And I said there were a couple spots that I thought they really needed to load up numbers-wise. One was the linebacker, where we think they're on track to sign 3 and possibly even 4. And then the other is the offensive line, where when they had 3, I said I could see them getting 4. When they got 4, I said I could see them getting to 5. And now here they are. 5 offensive line prospects for the class. I think they're done. Now, obviously, if the right guy wants to commit, they're not going to say no to a kid who's really high on their board if they have the opportunity to get one. But I think they're good with 5 offensive linemen. You needed to reload those numbers. Not just because you have such a large senior class, so they have 5 or 6 seniors, I think, on this year's 2022 roster. It's not just that, because you never want to be in a position with the offensive line where you recruit this class to replace your current seniors. You don't want these 5 guys who are going to come in as freshmen next year to step on the field and replace Carter Warren and Marcus Minor and those guys. But you do have some gaps in the lower classes that you are going to need to fill in. You should have the depth in 2023 with Branson Taylor and Matt Gonsalves and Jake Cradle, ideally coming back for another year, and Ryan Jacoby, being a little further along, Ryan Baer maybe being ready to play as a second-year player. You should have, and Blake Zabovic, it would be another one too, potentially could step in as your center in 2023. You should have, a solid starting 5. You should be able to build a starting 5, but you're going to need to prepare not just for 2023, but 2024 and 2025. You're going to need your 2 deep to have bodies. If nothing else, you're going to need players for those years. And so this was really a class where Pitt had to load up on offensive linemen, and that's what they've done with 5 commitments in the class so far. I'm sure they would like to hold on to all 5 of those. You never know these days who's going to stay committed and who's not. But even if they lose one and they can't find anyone to replace, a 4-man class is still really good. I mean that's what they needed this year, and it looks like they've gotten it. Number 3, this was kind of on the other end of the spectrum in terms of news. This was some sad news, some disappointing news, or unfortunate, I guess I would say. It's Marquand Pope, freshman linebacker enrolled in January out of Texas, came to Pitt and got hurt during spring camp and has had to retire from playing. He's unable to play due to, I think Pat Narduzzi got into something about a spinal injury that he might have had back in high school, and then an injury, had a similar injury now, and Pitt's doctors looked at it and said, no, you can't play, so he's had to medically retire. He'll stay around the program, or at least that's his intention now. Potentially, I guess either in a GA role or some kind of volunteer assistant role. I think he'll be able to stay on scholarship as a medically retired player. The NCAA allows you to do that and not have the player count against your 85 scholarships. But it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate on a few levels. I mean, one, kind of from the outside, where our perspective is really about wins and losses and who's going to help on the field, it's unfortunate because Marquand Pope looked like a really good prospect. He was one of these guys who was a big safety in high school. Pitt likes those kinds of players to bring him in and have him play outside linebacker at, ideally the star linebacker position in this defense, which is kind of a safety and, safety linebacker position. I think he was a great fit for that spot. I think he had the, ability and the size to even potentially move over and play the money linebacker, the short side of the field side linebacker, the boundary side linebacker as the money linebacker. I just think he had a lot of potential. And maybe we could even move into the middle at some point in his career. And so it was unfortunate for that to happen. That's our view from outside, where we just look at how guys are going to help the team, and it's unfortunate in that regard. But then the other side is just you feel bad for the player. You feel bad for the person. You're glad that if there was a health issue, it was discovered before anything more serious could happen. But you just, you feel bad for a young man who, obviously put in the work and made the decision to enroll early in January. He was there for spring camp. And then to have all of that taken away. It's unfortunate. You feel for the young man, but you hope he's able to channel that energy he had for football, the passion for football, the love of football, and channel it into coaching if that's what he's so inclined to do. That's what he chooses to pursue. So we wish the best to Marquand Pope. We actually had him as a guest on our signing day special series back in December, where we interviewed him. It was a great conversation. You can actually find that on our YouTube channel if you want to find out a little bit more about who Marquand Pope is. Scroll through our videos back to stuff from December, and you'll find some. It was a really good conversation. I thought he talked a lot about his role at his high school, a program with a real winning tradition. I think they were gearing up for the state championships at the time when we talked, and so you get a real insight into Marquand Pope as a player and as a person. I highly recommend that you check that out. Some of the other news that came out this week. Guess who's coming to town? It's College Game Day. The Brawl, the Backyard Brawl. Thursday, September 1st, College Game Day will be in town. They're going to be live from Acrisure Stadium to get ready for the biggest game in college football that night. And I know there are other games in college football that night, but this is the biggest game in college football that night. The Backyard Brawl, whatever you want to say about it, whatever you want to say about Pitt, whatever you want to say about West Virginia, I think the Backyard Brawl is one of the rivalries in college sports that is known. It resonates. I think people around the country point to, the Texas, Oklahoma, and they point to, Florida State. They point to insert your great classic rivalry here. Florida, Georgia. I mean, there are great rivalry games in college football that people around the sport love, that people around the sport cherish and look forward to, and did look forward to for a long time. There were annual events. And it's one of the ones that's been lost. And if you do a Google search, I haven't done this to back this up, I'm just sort of assuming, but if you search for, best college football rivalries that are no longer played, the Backyard Brawl ends up on a list more often than not. Probably all the time, for anybody who knows what they're talking about, because it was a great series of two schools separated by 70 miles with genuine dislike and hate for each other. Pitt fans look down on West Virginia fans. West Virginia fans think Pitt fans are snobs. It's just great. There's genuine hate and dislike, which is exactly what it should be. There's no mutual respect between Ohio State and Michigan. There's hate and dislike, and that's what it is with Pitt and West Virginia. And it's great that series is returning, and that makes it the biggest game in college football that night, only further emphasized by the fact that College Game Day is coming to town. They're going to be there. And all the spotlights that were already on Pitt and West Virginia for that night just got a little brighter. And that brings me to point number 5. The train is leaving the station. What train? The hype train. Because it's been building throughout the offseason, and these next 5 weeks, it's only going to keep building. It's only going to get louder. It's only going to get more exciting. It's only going to get more intense, and the pressure is going to build. And this is something we are going to talk about throughout training camp. We're going to ask the players about it. We're going to ask the coaches about it. And I'm going to write about it. And I'm going to talk about it on these recaps and on the Wednesday night show. And any other opportunity they get, the pressure is building. The spotlight is on. All right, you look through, who was it? ACC Network had a bunch of experts picking, the Coastal and the Atlantic and the ACC champ. Pitt got a lot of picks. Pitt's not going to sneak up on anybody this year. They're going to be ranked in the AP, the preseason poll, for the first time since 2010. And they're probably going to be a top 20 team. Should be between 15 and 20 is my guess. There's no sneaking up on anyone. College Game Day coming to town is just further evidence of it. Everybody knows that Pitt's got a chance to be really good this year. And College Game Day is not just coming to town because Pitt has a chance to be really good. They're coming to town because it's the Backyard Brawl on a Thursday night, with Pitt having a chance to be really good. I think you're going to see over the next 5 weeks more and more publications and writers and talk show hosts talk about Pitt being a dark horse candidate, a team that should be in contention to win the ACC and a dark horse candidate to make the playoffs. You're going to see this, and it's going to keep growing, and it's going to keep growing, and it's going to keep growing. And out here, we're all going to keep talking about it, and we're all going to keep feeding into it, and we're all going to keep building it up. And inside that building in the South Side, they're going to have to do everything they can to remember what got them to the success they achieved in 2021. They're going to have to remember that it wasn't about the hype, and it wasn't about the excitement, and it wasn't about the pressure. It was about going out and working and having Kenny Pickett and Jordan Addison. But I mean, that's let's focus on the things that you can control. The players that are here, as Pat Narduzzi said. It just keeps growing. And College Game Day is just another piece of hype thrown onto this thing that's it's fun to watch, it's exciting, and it's pressure too. And the pressure's building. It really is. All right, you know everything you need to know leading into the week. We are 1 week away from training camp. We're going to have one of these weekend recaps next Monday, and it's going to be all about the training camp preview, so you are ready to go. Of course, stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com this week. All week long, we're going to have training camp preview content throughout the week on the website, continuing to break down positions, continuing to preview opponents, continue to talk about some of the biggest questions and the biggest answers and some of the biggest things we know and biggest things we don't know heading into this season. Because it all starts, like 5 weeks from now. But it really starts, training camp starts 1 week from now. The team will report this coming weekend. Practice will start next week. It's here. I can't believe it. It's almost here. Next week, I'm going to say the same thing. I'm going to say, at the end of the video, at the end of next week's weekend recap, I'm going to go, it's here. You watch. I mean, I'll find a way to cut the clips and show you the two clips next to each other of me going, it's here. Because it's here. Thanks so much for checking out the weekend recap. Remember, we do these every Monday morning. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com to make sure you never miss any of our videos. We got the Monday morning weekend recap. We got the Wednesday night live stream where we talk Pitt sports for an hour. And then we got the Friday video series. We're going to try and video interview series. We're going to try and keep those up as we get through the summer and even into the fall and beyond. So thank you very much for checking this out. Of course, as training camp gets started, we're going to have a ton of video content here. So you can keep an eye on that. Make sure you subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Thanks for checking out the Monday morning weekend recap. Appreciate it. We'll be back on Wednesday night for the live stream, the live Panther-Lair show. So tune in then at 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.